Welcome to the Cove Podcast, your stop for PME on the go.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Cove Podcast. Today we're going to talk about performance, a lot of physical performance, but also how to expect high performance in teams and managing teams. I've got Brigadier James Davis, AMCSC, and he's the current Director General for Future Land Warfare. He's an Armoured Corps officer and was the CEO of 2nd Cavalry Regiment.
But more importantly for this episode, he continues to compete in fitness competitions, this year alone competing at a 21-kilometre Spartan race, but also at High Rocks, an event where competitors alternate between a 1-kilometre sprint and 8 functional exercises like ski erg, sled push, farmers carries and sandbag lunges inside the Brisbane Convention Centre. He has an excellent reputation for setting really high standards for himself, but also for others. Welcome to the podcast, sir.
Morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's a privilege to be here.
So, yeah, again, the topic will be on physical performance and how to maintain performance in teams. But I just want to ask first, obviously, you were the CEO of 2CAV, and now you've moved on since then through a number of different appointments, but you're now the Director General of Future Land Warfare. What does Future Land Warfare do?
Future Land Warfare is responsible to headland capability and the Chief of Army for the Army 2 to 10 years in the future. What does that mean? I do concepts, that's how the Army fights, conduct experiments to test the ways of fighting, particularly with the addition of new technologies, particularly application of artificial intelligence and autonomy. I support the Chief of Army to respond to things like the National Defence Strategy to change the organisation of the Army, and I conduct research and I'm responsible for Army's history as well, because through those two things you learn and then put what you've learnt about past conflicts or current conflicts into practice in the design of the Army.
Yeah, perfect. So we talked and the previous episode was Dr. Jack Watling. He talked about Project Convergence and some of those experiments leaning into, I suppose, coalition, large-scale experiments. Is that sort of part of your remit?
Right. I am responsible for Army's contribution to Project Convergence. Yep. We're just in the lead-up stage to Project Convergence Capstone 5. That'll happen in the National Training Centre and in the region in March and April next year. Really focused on network integration for long-range fires and the application of remote and autonomous systems.
And for anyone who gets a call for noms for Project Convergence, please lean into it because it was an absolutely awesome experience. And yeah, leveraging on that, the resources that the US have in particular is absolutely awesome. Now, performance and managing performance in teams. Obviously, you've been a commander, and I talked in some of the early episodes about having the inability to think because we are so busy or reflect on our time. You've had some time since command, and no doubt you've been busy ever since and haven't had the time to reflect potentially. But how did you set a really high bar in terms of performance, on the outset, and was it deliberate before you went into command?
Thanks, Todd. I suppose I would start with a caveat that, I was in command a long time ago. Like, I started a decade ago as the CEO of 2CAV, and that was a past time in the Army. And I don't really think that I set high standards or standards that were higher than any other commanding officer. The way I approached it was just to think about our profession and what our profession demands, and you can't fudge that, right? Like, conflict is demanding, and Clausewitz says that war is the realm of physical exertion and suffering, and we know that's true. So if you're not training to that, then you're just kidding yourself, right? And that was sort of my start point.
So that's where you started. And then, we go through career courses and they talk about setting a command philosophy or sort of setting some sort of tone within the organisation immediately. How did that suffering and the sort of realistic approach that it is going to be incredibly difficult, how did that sort of, and I'm not talking about the document for command philosophy, but also how did that genuinely set your command philosophy?
And it's interesting. If you look at the document, right, I took all the fluff out. And when you hear people talking about active and passive voice, we have so much passive voice in our organisation. Things happen as opposed to people doing things. And once you take that that philosophical position that I have agency over me, I am responsible for me, I am responsible for what happens in my part of the organisation, I think then you're having hard conversations with yourself. If this is not working to the standard that I want, then who is that on? That is on me. And if you can inculcate that across your entire organisation, then you can get to high performance. I spoke to every new soldier into the regiment, and some of them would introduce themselves as, I'm just a driver. No, you're not just a driver. You're a driver in the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, and if you're the only person who keeps the AFV pointed at the enemy. If you decide to turn, no matter, your crew commander cannot do anything to stop that from happening. It is your will and your courage that keeps the front of the AFV pointed at the objective. And so you're the single most important link in the regiment. The power of a driver to not do something and to have that a mission, cost mission, is 100% right. Don't do your servicing. That AFV will fail. And as people know, cavalry regiments run on human machine teams.
Yeah, no, exactly right. Okay, so, and then I suppose that's how you conveyed it down. I think that's an awesome way to set the tone, but if we rewind a little bit and come back to, like, I suppose you need to expect a lot high things of yourself the entire time prior to taking up command in your entire career. Why fitness, and why setting a really high bar for a personal level first throughout your entire career?
It's an interesting question, and I don't think there are so many high-performing officers and NCOs and soldiers in our army. If I'm one of them, then that's an absolute privilege. I'm not sure I am. And I have been less high-performing. Probably as a captain, I started to read more, and that's when I read things like Steal My Soldiers' Hearts, which is a Dave Hackworth book, About Face, another Dave Hackworth book, anything by Patton, and you start to realise actually there's only one standard, and that's the standard that combat operations set. And then I started changing around that time to get at those things. I was a Cav officer instructor, and I felt the responsibility and the privilege of being able to impact a whole bunch of people. So I started applying the standards that I thought combat operations would expect.
So it's less so, I suppose, high intrinsic motivation prior, but then you read how realistic it's going to be and how tough and how it's going to completely grind at your body, and you're like, this is more serious than I thought.
Right, and I mean, it's an interesting time. I'd come from one brigade. They were basically on continual rotations through operations. Every crew commander I trained was coming out of operations and going back on operations. All the lieutenants I was training at the School of Armour were going on operations. And so it seemed that was obvious that we would set the standards, and it's little things, right? Like your helmet doesn't work if the chin strap's not done up. And so, we've got a crew commander in a, $15 million armoured fighting vehicle, but for one of doing up a $50 chin strap, they placing themselves at unnecessary risk. Well, why, so those sort of things just made sense to me to do, whether that's high standards or, why wouldn't you wear your body armour?
Yeah, that's right. I think setting high standards, and then you could argue that meeting the minimum bar with that sort of stuff, but it is sort of walking around setting high standards is like fault correcting that behaviour. And I suppose I'm going to talk about my approach in that I'm an eternal optimist, so I try to look at the rosy view of everything, and it's especially now I'm back as a DO at ADFA, and I assume that everyone's trying to do the right thing, right? And it's really difficult, and I'll push it. I know I'll push it way too far in terms of like assuming that people have the right intentions when they definitely don't. how do you, over sort of time, I suppose, how do you get better at that? Or have you ever struggled with it? Is it hard? And how do you get better at just fault correcting as soon as it's, there? Or having a tough decision to have that conversation and talk about the purpose?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And I've struggled with this my whole career. Sometimes too assertive, sometimes too much. You don't really need to sleep in your body armor. There's other choices you can make there. But it's a variety of approaches. Sometimes you need to sit down with someone and say, I'm not being a dickhead. I hope I'm allowed to say that on the Cove. I genuinely really care, and this is why I'm doing this, because I want you to come home.
Yeah.
And the way I think to do that is to instill these behaviours. Other things like, as a CEO, I made nearly standing jokes about our standards. So I didn't allow chairs with arms in the field because they led to a whole bunch of behaviours about sitting around, facing in, all these things. They took up a lot of room in vehicles that I knew was going to be filled with ammunition. All the soldiers who'd been on operations knew the vehicles were filled with ammunition and spare weapons and all this sort of stuff. So I just banned chairs with arms in the regiment, and I put a thing in routine orders, even by NSN. And then we had these chair death squads that would round them up. And OC Support Squad and Trent Groves, who's an absolute legend, filled my office with chairs with arms. And that's fantastic, because I'm like, that's 100% these guys are getting it. Doesn't have to be, punishments and stuff. And then you can, hey sir, I saw another chair with arms. It was in 3 CSSB. We've got to get down there. So a variety of approaches, I think, is the summary.
Yep, I was in 3 CSB at the time, and that was awesome to have all our chairs stolen as well. So it's good. No, that's absolutely awesome. So I suppose that's the tough decisions is like genuinely because you care, not because, you see this sort of facade come up and they're like, oh, I just told him to do that and I just told them to do that. It's like, it's not for you, buddy. Like, it needs to be some purpose behind it and be like, no, we're setting a high standard because the realities of what we're going into. And some of the episodes in the past have talked about Lark, Gull and Sparrow Force and sort of going into that forward observation line. Like, we're starting to get into the real realities of what
And I reckon, like, if watch Generation Kill, I reckon that's a very high quality a series, and look at the different personalities. The Sergeant Major with these haircuts and whatever, he's too much.
Yeah.
It's actually the Colberts and those type of people who hold the line but do it in a way that knows where people are at, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Notorious for setting a high performance in terms of physical fitness and really leaning into your physical fitness and expecting a lot. But how do you think it extends past just, going to, and I think we talked pre-episode about the grind and getting into that zone where you're like really hurting, do you know what I mean? You're pushing past that sort of point. How do you think that, or what does that feeling feel like for you, in the grind at the time, but then more broadly, how's that applicable across your career, noting that you're now a general and like that performance across the time has just been absolutely awesome. Like, how do we sort of take something out of that in terms of, how physical fitness links with your actual performance?
Yeah, it's fascinating. There's physical performance as an output, and I think that can be different and separate from physical well-being linked to physical performance. And this is something that's only come to me in the last couple of years. I ran at redline most of my career, and I reckon if you take an average resting heart rate and a whole bunch of other behaviours, you would find I was probably not, my physical well-being was lower than my physical performance. And the thing about getting old is that eventually that all catches up with you, and then you'll realise that your life would be better if you got off redline. And that's something that I've worked hard on doing over the last couple of years. So aiming, and you talk to someone who knew me when I was a major captain CO, I didn't sleep a lot. That's probably not a healthy place to be. Sometimes you got to do it, but now I'm a sleeping professional.
Perfect.
And I have these conversations with other people who are I look up to and who are high performing, and that's where I learnt this from. They're trying to sleep for Australia. All these diet, all these things, giving back to yourself, to give you the foundation of physical well-being that you can then build performance on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, I suppose a balancing act to a certain degree, and something that's, again, we've spoken about some difficult things to balance. That's probably one of them as well, especially if you're gun ho and you're just absolutely banging it in constantly.
Right. Yeah. And there's other people in your life too, right? And it's important for me to acknowledge to the listeners, many of whom earlier on in your career is running on red line for years, has had impacts on my family. I'm separated. I would say that part of that was my running on red line for such a long time. It makes it hard for you to live with as a human, and it's totally okay to not do that and listen to the people who are around you and telling you what running on red line does for them, because I'm pretty sure not everyone sort of wants to live the de facto life of a cavalry officer running on red line, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I've worked for one in a brigade headquarters, and it was so the no sleep
Well,
thing. I'm like,
yeah.
oh god, yeah.
You're looking remarkably well, actually.
yeah, that's right. You talked about getting advice and having mentors and stuff. I suppose, how do you cut through for those people that are telling you slow down a little bit, and vice versa, the guys that are really trying to put it more into perspective, and you're trying to get that mentor relationship out? How do you cut out the noise and concentrate? How do you pick your mentors or the people that you rely upon for opinion?
A really good question. Look, I think you've got to have a natural affinity with them. The people you're drawn to are the people you're drawn to. I don't have a formal mentor. There's simply people who I respect, admire, and look up to. But it's okay to be balanced in that view. There's a long line of people in my particular area of army who have been hard driving for 35 years and have imparted a whole bunch of incredibly valuable lessons to me. But, it's totally okay to say, yeah, but they're a bit too much. And I contrast that with a different approach over here. So maybe try to diversify the signals you're getting. Would be one recommendation that I would make later in life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense, yeah. Trying to get in, I suppose you get in that loop and then you're constantly competing, and then you're competing, and then you're like, oh God, I've been doing this for so long. Like,
right.
Maybe dial it back a touch, you know what I mean? Or ebb and flow to a certain degree.
And recognise that what that community thinks is important is actually probably in the grand scheme of things not that. There's a whole bunch of fields of endeavour out there who know nothing about what's going on in your micro world, and if you told them, they'd be like, okay, that's interesting. I'm trying to address hunger in the third world.
Okay. Completely different. Yeah. Speaking of ebbing and flowing and the like, and peak performance at periods, then dropping off sort of at times. So as we're going to appointments, and there'll be platoon sergeants out there that'll be like, I currently work for a boss that doesn't prioritise, and a CSM that doesn't prioritise fitness, or I'm a captain in a regiment headquarters, and I'm working for an OPSO that finds a lot of solace in having their staff around them at all times. How do you think it's from staff appointments? How do we get away from or prioritise some of that time to really continue to perform well and balance yourself out and think about things, rather than those people that hold their staff, constantly, and think that in the, I suppose mitigating short-term risk, but inherently, creating
Right.
more long-term risk.
Right.
What do you say to those sort of people?
So I suppose if you're the individual, you're the captain on the headquarters, you got to be brave, right? And being brave is about being clear about what's important to you. And this gets back to change what you can change, manage what you can manage. So it's super important to me that I go to PT. I'm willing to sacrifice other things. I'll work later if that's what's required. I'll work before PT. But it's important to me that I am there and I am asking for your support to do that as often as I can. How's that conversation? Is that major or whoever going to say no in those circumstances? That's a big call. Can you imagine that conversation?
Yeah.
No, you're not going to do PT. Like, if someone said that to me, then I think I would require another level of courage to then say, sir, I don't think that's okay. And then you might go and get a bit of peer support, go and talk to the edge or whatever. Hey, I just got told I can't do PT. Sooner or later, that's going to find its place, work its way in the system, because clearly that's a ridiculous thing. So just be clear on what's important to you, what you can control, what you can manage, and be. Sorry.
Oh, and have a bit of a bit of a realistic expectation where I'll cover the gaps, and I understand the risk that you're trying to mitigate.
Yeah.
I'll cover it in other ways, through other means. Yeah.
And I said the examples I gave there are about giving back my time, but it doesn't actually have to be about giving back my time. Like, if you can deliver the outcomes, or what is the risk that you're actually trying to mitigate? If the risk we're trying to mitigate is the BM might call and we need to answer. Okay, can we have a rotation system? So there's always someone in here, find the way.
Yeah. Okay, now down to the individual level though, like when we get to 3-4 captain, I'm right in the beaten zone, I suppose, for this. But like you go into some jobs where there's no one doing PT and, it's completely intrinsic motivation, and there is a temptation to drop back and stop, you know what I mean? And one of my old warrant officers said to me, he's like, once you stop, you'll never start again. And that's always stuck with me. But I suppose, what do you say to those people that come from high charging command appointments and they want to take a little bit of a respite, but then start to sort of, they start to do less PT and look after themselves less and probably consume a bit more calories than they would otherwise do.
Yeah, and look, it's, I think if you tell yourself once I stop, I never start again, then that's a true statement. You could tell yourself, actually, I'm going to slow down for a period of time because I know that I can go back to other levels. And that's true, right? Like, the idea that you stop, you never start again, well, if you want that to be true, well, it will be.
Yeah.
So, it's like the pyramid, right? Like sleep's at the bottom, then it's nutrition. Then I would put, as an old fart, like mobility and flexibility, then strength, then cardiovascular, right? You back off the cardiovascular for 6 months. If you take care of the rest of the pyramid below that, that's going to come back. Yeah, it's going to suck coming back. Yeah, it's going to suck, but you won't, you're managing the impacts.
Yeah. Going to suck coming back, but it will come back, rather than, the opposite, where it's just never. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. If you neglect the foundation over a long period of time, that's going to be hard to get back, because you're going to have to restore the foundation and then build on that. But if you keep the foundation strong, then you can always layer back on top of it.
Yeah. Okay. With the high expectations of a high-performing team, and we understand the realities of like what we're in the business of, I suppose. What has there been any negative aspects of like pushing a team? I suppose we're always trying to find that balance between dialing a little bit back and then pushing them forward, and then dialing a little bit back and finding that. What are or have you observed any negatives of pushing teams too far, or like just how do we get that balance right, in terms of how do we know when we've pushed them a little bit too far, we need to dial it back a little bit and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, totally. As you go on longer in your career, particularly staying at the tactical level, you become the most experienced person in the unit. That is true as a CO. There'll be NCOs who are more experienced than you, but also as you get later in your tenure, you get more confident. And by my third year in command, I was a safety risk because I'd been commanding AFVs for 20 years, all these things, but that, wasn't making it any easier for a new soldier driving an NVG at 2 o'clock in the morning on an unfamiliar part of the range, and so the things like unit safety days were more about not about listening to PowerPoint briefs, about listening to each other and telling each other, what do we think we're doing that's actually dangerous? Because I guarantee it's not. Well, yes, there's a risk of chemical spill down in the workshop, but actually, let's have some hard conversations here and about the whole system from the top command direction down to the bottom. This is not about a material data safety sheet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Put some realistic risks in place, or have those tough decisions about. Yeah. So, and that's how you sort of dial it back.
So on Unit Safety Day, we would go to our memorial stone and talk about how the soldiers there died. It's really only one of two ways: vehicle accidents or accidental shootings. Makes it pretty clear what your focus needs to be on safety.
Yeah. How do you find that? I suppose we talk about machines or processes. How do you personally, like, I suppose a few takeaways? How do you personally, talked about prioritising fitness as a result of some reading as a captain, predominantly a lot of, which really puts it into perspective and gives that purpose. The second thing is, I suppose, how do you, are there any tools, tips and tricks for getting, incredibly efficient with your time, or like, how do you prioritise your time? What do you say no to when you just like blanket? Because work for different commanders are like, I don't touch that because I don't find value in it. And that's fine because we go through ebbs and flows of commanders and stuff. But how do you, prioritise your time, become more efficient, and really deliberately carve out time to do certain things? Yeah.
So I think probably step one is understand yourself and what you value first, so that you can then direct the time against the most important things. So, and it's taken me a long time to work that out. And, both my kids are ASD. Chances are that I've probably got a fair bit of that in me too. And that's been a really helpful thing for me to explore too. Like, what am I like as a person? Now that I've worked that out, I know that social interaction chews my energy down like nobody's business. So I'm really strict on how much of that I do. I find professional interaction totally the opposite. Like this is not costing me energy. So that's something, knowing myself there. So where do I need to be careful that I don't waste energy? What do I value? Well, I value health and well-being, right? So first thing I do every day, physical training, right? And being, I know some days if I want to do it, it's 4 o'clock start. It's, so then I'm like, okay, if I also value sleep, what time am I going to bed? Yeah, 8 o'clock.
Yeah,
which is crazy.
Yeah,
but that's where you sort of end up there when you work through these things.
Yeah.
And then the other big enablers in this, like, so if you're a factory floor that you're trying to lean out, you try to work out where you waste time. So if you waste time, if you're a slow reader, for example, that can cost you a bunch of time just processing stuff. Is there anything you can do to increase your reading capacity? Of course there is. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do there. I find, we burn so much time in meetings. How do you get at that? Well, one, don't let people schedule hour-long meetings.
Yeah.
Schedule 15-minute meetings. Make them stand-up meetings to drive to the outcomes that you want, not what other people think you. Yeah, that's right. Think you need or want.
It's that well-intentioned staff officer, like they perceive that you want this when in actual fact you're like, I didn't say that, I said this, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Right. And what are the decisions you actually need to make at your level versus the freedom that you can give others to just execute within their own delegations. So that's probably the other part is the saying, delegate until you're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That's true. Do
Yeah.
that. Look, I think the idea of performance is not about an arbitrary standard. It's about your best at that time, and that will change all the time as you go through life. And your best is across a whole variety of parts of your life. It's your best as a dad, a mum, a partner, a friend, an army officer, a fitness person, whatever. And it's totally okay to trade off between those for your, what you want out of life, right? Like this is, you only get one of these. And, our professional lives are a huge part of it, but they're not us. They don't define all of us. And I have been defined by my profession at various times. But know that know when you're making those choices, be sure that's the choice you want to make. It's okay to play with ideas. We tell ourselves we've got an army system that'll allow this. So if you're not sure, play with it. Hypothesize, test, experiment, and adjust. And if you want to get better in an area, it's just like anything, right? Like pull the problem apart.
Yeah.
Where am I bleeding energy? Where am I bleeding time? Okay, can I get better in those areas? And the start point for that is confidence and in your agency. I can change this. This is within my capacity to affect. And that's the start point for any positive change in your life, I think.
Yep. That sphere of influence, like ignore things. I definitely know that I cannot change that in any way, shape or form, and there's nothing I can do about that. So sort of letting it fly by and really honing in on that stuff that's inside your sphere of influence, I suppose, or control, under your control.
Right, because all that other stuff you can't influence, if you're getting wound up about it, that just costs you energy. That's seconds and minutes that you're not focused on the things that you can change, right? And the one more quick story. When I was a squadron commander, our CO was quite demanding, as you'd expect a CO. And I sort of wrestled with a lot, like some of these demands, they're crazy, there's no way we're going to be able to do this, And then I sort of flipped in my head and I just said yes to everything. And one, that created a whole bunch of capacity because no one had to try to work out what we were or weren't doing or whether we're going to fight something. We're just like, yes. And what we found, actually, we're a lot more capable than we thought we were as an organisation, or we got a lot more efficient.
Yeah.
Now, there were some things after, that I said yes to, and then 3 weeks later I went back and said, hey, here's the full list, and our guess is these 3 are the lowest priority. You okay with that? But what that taught me is yes is a very powerful, yes, we can, is a very powerful mindset, and that you have more potential and capacity than you think you do. You will find the way, and that can be infectious too.
And I suppose wasting that time saying no as well. I think you think, I'll say no to this so we don't have to do anything. No. You're still going through the whole analysis behind the task and trying to work out. And then you're trying to come up with arguments as to why, and you're shaping your arguments around why we can't do it.
Yep.
Like inefficiency in that sense, especially if you're going to get told at the end of the day and talked about the sphere of influence, it's outside of your control. Start cracking on, probably.
And there is also something powerful in this for an army organisation. We need to be good followers and do, in 44, after the worst floods in Europe in 80 years, Patton wants to resume the offensive, and 2 of his corps commanders come to him and, the biblical rains, and they say, we're not going today. And he just looks at them and says, name your successes. Because his judgment is it's just as bad for the Germans, and if not today, then when, right?
Yeah.
We're just delaying the war. The quicker we get into it, the quicker it's done. It's going to cost us no matter what we do, and we sometimes lose sight of that. That on one day someone's going to ask us just to go up the hill, and it's not going to make, it's going to cost us, lives and those things. But that's our profession, right?
With the individual performance things, and you talked about trade-offs and sort of like ebbing and flowing. I use that term, not you, sir, but ebbing and flowing through postings and prioritising different things. I think we get this assumption that we look left and right at the people competing with us, and we're like, if we drop off the sort of gas, we're going to slip behind. Do you know what I mean? And they're not going to understand. They're just going to buzz straight past. Sometimes that's a perception. It's not reality. In that, people say you prioritise different things, and they're with you on that because they're also prioritising different things, or you're using opportunities or looking for opportunities to sort of choose those trade-offs. When you have been able to do that and prioritise other things other than the profession in itself at times. What's the reception from your peers or from others been? Has it been exactly that they just ruthlessly step over you, or is it more so on the side of?
No, look, I think the saying that everyone's fighting their own great battles is true, and you don't know what their battles are at that point in time, and I don't think there's no conveyor belt here. General Campbell was Chief Defence Force. He left the Army for a bunch of time. General Toohey left the Army and came back. Some of our commanding officers have left the Army to go and do stuff or prioritised, various other parts of their lives. I mean, of course. What does it even What does it even matter? This gets back to the you, and there's no set idea of performance. It's you on that day in that situation with all the other things in their life. I guarantee there's a whole bunch of people out there who are a better dad, partner, etc. than me. Who cares if I was a awesome whatever at a point 10 years ago, if you know what I mean. It's all it's not. There's no universal definition, and be okay with that. That little thing of hey, what do I look back when I'm 70? That's a helpful thing to go. Okay, do I really need to burn myself out on this particular activity? I think your subordinates will appreciate that too, because they're all fighting their own same battles too, right? And be human. Tell them what you're struggling with, because they're struggling with the same stuff. They're the good conversations to have. Maybe that's where performance comes from too, not performance in sort of a veneer, if you know what I mean. It's and then you'll can also get your team, because there's different people doing different things at different times, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, exactly right. That's exactly. Yeah, I think that performance is a veneer, and then digging a bit deeper and making trade-offs is an awesome takeaway, I suppose.
Yeah, I didn't realise that at the start, and the way we started was sort of talking about potentially performance as an output, but actually be careful that it's not performance as a veneer, if that makes sense, because running fast is just running fast, if you know what I mean. And I guarantee you that there's a whole bunch of people out there that can run fast, but what does that mean in the context of our profession? It's about you, your contribution at a point in time, and that being the best you want it to be, because you've got to consciously sometimes accept it's only going to be X, and I've got to be okay with that, because if I go higher than that, I'm going to get cooked in this other areas.
No, Awesome. Thank you so much for your time as well. This is definitely the best one we've recorded so far, so that's absolutely awesome. Thank you for your time, and we'll obviously come back and talk about some future land warfare stuff. This is the meaty stuff that I hope section commanders out there, troop commanders, OCs, and those just about to take up command of units really like lean into this sort of realisation and some awesome takeaways. Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks, Todd. I think this is also the best podcast that you've ever podcasted.
Yeah.
And I'm just really grateful for the opportunity. I think when you're talking about performance, there's a bit of a risk that you can, say that you're sort of hot shit, and that's not the case at all. We're just human beings all sort of struggling to find our way forward as best we can for our organisation, our lives, and the people that matter to us.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, sir.
Thanks for listening to the Cove Podcast. Explore our channel for more great audio PME content. Also, visit us at cove.army.gov.au for hundreds of additional resources. The Cove, the learning home of the Australian profession of arms.